In the beginning, God created relationships between God and angels, God and man, and between all of us. Through the love of God and the peace of Christ and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit, we are all interconnected. Come join Pastor Penny Schulz and Kristen Scharrenberg as scholars, counselors, travelers through the Holy Land, and warriors in Christ, while they explore the fascinating, the difficult, the obscurities, the oddities, and the hope of God's holy word. They will discuss what those scriptures mean to us and how living in the Spirit changes everything.
Hello and welcome to
Live Life in the Spirit.
If you are tuning in for the first time, we're so glad you're joining us. We are your hosts. I am Kristen Scharrenberg.
And I'm Pastor Penny Schulz.
We promise you some joy, some inspiration, and also some interesting, intriguing, out-of-the-box thinking. You can go back and watch or listen to our previous vodcast podcasts on our YouTube channel, Rumble, or the various podcast feeds like iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iTunes, and many others.
We are super excited to announce that because of popular demand, we've created our own t-shirts with our own logo and message everyone has wanted. God is still writing your story. Stop trying to steal the pen.
On the back is an awesome way to point others to the truth. Have them scan our QR code right from your shirt, and it'll take them to our website. They can watch and listen to the vodcast or the podcast and read all of our blogs. You can order our t-shirts and Penny's CD or vintage cassette tapes as well.
If you have either sat in church your whole life or have read the Bible faithfully many times and find yourself saying, I never heard that before, or where is that in the Bible? Or I didn't get that out of that passage. Well, this is the place for you. We're going to dive into those very obscure and interesting passages, all while bringing to light why they're so important. Because once you know, you can't unknow.
Before we dive in, let's take a moment to introduce ourselves.
Kristen has been working in the mental health field for 15 years, helping people heal from addiction and journeying into a new creation.
Penny started out in the medical field, and then God moved her into the ministry over 24 years ago. She has been shepherding the lost ever since through music, drama, magic to the Gospels, and serving multiple congregations.
Well, today's t-shirts are in honor of Balaam, or Balaam, or Balaam, depending how you want to say his name. Everybody says it differently, and we're probably all butchering it, but I would say in Hebrew it's probably Balaam.
Right.
But for the sake of ease of saying it, we're probably just going to go with Balaam.
Yes, because I probably won't get Balaam right every time, and then we'll have lots of retakes.
That's right. Well, anyone who's heard the word of God and yet tries to make it fit into their own gain, how can I have it both ways kind of thinking? That's really what we're going to dive into today with Balaam. So, in honor of him, today's shirt is, Hang on, let me overthink this. Well, the last 3 weeks, we've actually been looking at the Dark Trinity, which was Baal, Ashtoreth, and Molech, and what they've actually done when we've let them into the nation, and who's really the entities behind a lot of the chaos. As we kind of have been talking this last week, we dug in a little more to the history of Roe versus Wade to find out a little more. Just some things weren't quite settling, and I was wanting to know more about it, and Kristen came up with some very interesting facts.
I did. So we had just sort of talked in passing that we thought Jane Roe was probably not an actual person's name because too close to Jane Doe, and that's accurate. They had used that pseudonym to just protect her privacy at the time. And Wade was the county attorney, so she was suing the county attorney to have the right to have an abortion because she lived in Texas. Her name was Norma McCorvey. And interestingly enough, so what I discovered as I just researched a little bit more about her as a person, she had 3 daughters. And the first 2 daughters she had, I think, I might not be perfectly accurate on the age. I think she was like 16 and 19, so pretty young. And she carried them and had given them both up for adoption. And so the pregnancy that happened that was resulted in Roe versus Wade was her 3rd pregnancy. And she filed to to try to get the abortion in March of 1970. And obviously the result didn't happen until January 22nd of 1973. So the baby had been born and she gave it up for adoption just like she did the first two. And as time went on, there've been research done once her name was finally released. And those 3 girls have been contacted and they wanted to find out if they knew who they were and who their mom was. And actually the third daughter, was interviewed and has had the opportunity to meet her half sisters. So that I thought was a really neat, kind of hopeful thing that happened out of something that was a difficult story. And then the other part that I found was just fascinating was Norma McCorvey herself was not at all really what the media would have portrayed her to be.
Well, the interesting thing with looking at that story with her, fortunately, we kind of mentioned we wondered if she had been a pawn, somebody who capitalized on the pain of what this young gal had been going through. And even the side that was wanting to use her to promote the abortion, they really didn't want her there. They just wanted her as a face, as a name, but they didn't want her to say anything.
She was obviously initially on the pro-choice side of things, but they would invite her to dinners or invite her to different things, and they would tell her what to say, and then that was it. And they didn't really include her in anything. And it sounds like she had maybe some difficult things happen, and she was a pretty troubled individual anyways. And so she was looking for a place, I think, to have a voice and to belong and to fit in. And so then later in life, she actually met a preacher and became what she would have called a born-again Christian, and then joined the pro-choice side of things. Well, then obviously that was a big deal for the person in this case to have switched sides, so to speak. But again, even they seemed to not really include her as well, and used her name and some of that. But then it also talked about the fact that she was an opportunist, and so she took money from both sides of things. And so I think
whichever way the wind blew, whichever way that paid the bills,
she went along with that. And so really, she was not the staunch supporter either way. From a mental health perspective, I thought about that quite a bit. From someone who clearly just for having 3 different children and not keeping any of them and putting them all up for adoption, and all of that happening at such a young age, and some of just the other parts of her story showed that she really was troubled, and she was seeking answers, and she was seeking to be heard. And oftentimes people who are in that kind of situation, we would call it they're good at getting their needs met, and that's a way of saying that, like, that's why she was an opportunist, because she needed her needs met. She needed the bills to be paid and some of that stuff. And so rather than, unfortunately, there were opportunities for maybe help or healing or support that she didn't find. And so she continued to seek it in sort of all the wrong places. And that it made me sad, and to think that that became the foundation of what was our nation's entire movement. Just goes to show that none of it was about the people. And just, I don't know, to me, just really highlighted the influence that these entities have had in changing huge policy things, that if we knew the actual story, there was no reason for it to look like that or turn out that way.
But the hope that we talked about, the good news was that all 3 babies, none were aborted. They were all adopted out. They all got back together eventually and met and had a very good ending.
That part of it, at least.
Actually, that's a pretty good segue from last week into this week, really. Because we're going to look at somebody else who was manipulated and kind of an opportunist. And his name is, a lot of people say Balaam, or if you're doing Hebrew, it's Balaam.
Probably won't do that.
Probably not. And he is a seer. He does divination. From pagan, he's not Israelite at all. And Why is he important? Because at the beginning, episode 1 and 2, we talked about those odd things, those obscurities, those little oddities in the Bible that maybe you don't know about. So how many listening to this have ever heard of a talking donkey?
Good question.
Yes, it is actually in the Bible. If I were to say that, most people would probably laugh. But then if I said there was a book called Numbers in the Bible, they'd probably laugh at that too. And yet both do exist. And that's what we're going to dig into today. I promised that we were going to get into the talking donkey, and so here we are. But that is a deep story. It's very broad, and it's connected to so many things. Why is it in there? Well, if it's weird and it's odd and it's in the Bible, you probably better pay attention because it's important.
That's right. Thank you, Dr. Michael Heiser.
We're going to go back and just kind of give a little bit of a frame reference of this. You know, one of our biggest pet peeves is when you take a scripture and use it out of context.
Right.
But, you know, you can do more than just a passage or a scripture. You can take a whole chunk, and if you don't know the entire context around that story, it just seems like it's its own thing floating out there.
Right.
It doesn't mean anything. So we're going to back up just a hair. We're going to be looking at Numbers. We're going to go back to chapter 20.
Yes.
Before.
But not before the beginning, because we already did that.
That's right.
Well, as we were reading through this, I was just drawn into Numbers, which I can honestly tell you has never happened before. But I went back and read actually the entire book up through past the story that we're talking about today. And it was very interesting because they've been in exile in Egypt, and Moses has led them across the Red Sea, and then they had to wander in the desert because they saw something that scared them, even though God had just saved them from Pharaoh and parted the waters and rescued them.
And what was it that scared them?
Giants.
Giants, that's right. Oh my gosh, but this is post-flood.
How can that happen? We kind of talked about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. But, so it's towards the end of that 40-year period when they've been wandering in the desert. And so they are preparing now to head towards the promised land. And that's kind of sets the scene a little bit for where this story starts. And they've started, and they're kind of started and stopped and had to go around because there's some people that didn't let them walk through their territory.
So Edom.
Yep.
And Edom is from Esau. So when you have Esau and Jacob and the split, well, now that's who the Edomites come from.
Oh, okay.
And so they should have let Israel, and it's interesting because Israel keeps saying, we're not going to touch anything, we're not going to let even our livestock eat anything, or
we're not
drink
drink
your
water.
wells,
Right.
Nothing, we're just going to keep on moving.
We just want to walk through the King's Highway.
And they said no. And they asked them like 2 or 3 times. I mean, they're asking them, please, we just want to go down the King's Highway. We promise we will touch nothing.
And they even offered, if for some reason our livestock would drink some water or we would need something, we'll pay for it. Mm-hmm. And the king just said no.
Yep. So then
they had to kind of divert back down and go a little bit farther south and back up. So they're in what would be Jordan and eventually into Syria.
So this is why it becomes a big deal, because as they're coming up, the Amorites and Moabites had gone to war against each other. And the Amorites had beat the Moabites. So when the Israelites are coming up and God is with them and they beat the Amorites, and I mean they totally destroy them, that has Balak, the king of Moab, shaking in his shoes. And that's why he was so sick.
With dread.
That's right.
That makes sense.
Anyway, so they come on up and they come towards Moab, and the king is Balak. Balak, actually, is how you would, or if you want to get really technical, Balak.
But we don't, because then we're going to get spit all over.
That's right. So we're not going to be too Hebrew today. So Balak he sends message to Balaam, and he says, I want you to come, there are these people, and I want you to curse them. Now, who is Balaam, however you want to say his name? Mm-hmm. He is actually a seer. He does divination. which means he talks to entities, deities of all kind. He doesn't care.
Whoever pays the bills.
That's right. He is an opportunist. So whoever has the money, and he does. He has spiritual powers, so to speak, because he can hear from these entities. So Balak then goes to him and says, I want you to do this. And he sends princes with money.
Mm-hmm.
So Balaam then says, well, let me go and ask God. Now, he does have some true knowledge of the God of Israel, the God Almighty, Yahweh. And he does. He actually talks to him.
Right.
Now, Balaam didn't really know who he was dealing with, or he would not have asked God, should I go?
Right.
Because that was the whole point. Israel's coming up and they're defeating people and they're moving into this land.
Mm-hmm.
If they are God's chosen and he knows that, why would he even ask, should I curse them?
Right, that's true.
But God says, he does answer him.
Mm-hmm.
And what does he say?
You shall not go with them.
No, you shall not curse the people, for they are blessed.
That's right.
Now, Balaam is thus trapped between the demands and the temptation of Balak and the commands of God. And he says, God doesn't want me to do this, but I can be persuaded. That's actually kind of paraphrased, but in a sense, you really, really dig into the commentaries. It wasn't a cut and dried
He didn't just say, absolutely not, I can't do it. He left the door open a little bit.
Yes, he did. There was a
talk
crack
about how
open.
that's not good thing.
I know. He leaves the door a crack open. So the second time, then, of course, King Balak will not accept no for an answer, so he sends more princes, more prestigious, more money, and says, I will literally give you anything you want, just come. And then he's going to persuade him to curse him. So now when the people come, he says, stay another night. He says, I will go to the Lord and see basically if he has any more to say. Well,
right.
what he's... I don't like the first answer,
vague,
so let me see what he'll say the second time. Wow. Yeah. We'll get into that probably later.
That's not really a good idea to do that. Like when God gives you the answer and you're like, I've done that in my life. It doesn't turn out so well.
I know. So then God allows him, he says, okay, you can go with him. He allows him to go because he knows Balaam's heart. But he's going to prove a big point at the destination, and that's what nobody else realizes. So Balaam rises in the morning, he saddles his donkey with the princes of Moab, and then it says God's anger is aroused when he went. Now, if you're just reading this, and you're reading it word for word without knowing the context, you're like, well, why would God be angry at him? He just told him to go. But what did God tell him first?
Don't go.
And what could he not do?
Kristen.
But yet Balaam goes, I'll go again and I'll ask again and maybe he'll let me go. Why would you even let him think he could go?
Right. Because if he knows he's not supposed to go and he's not supposed to curse them, then to come back and say, are you sure I can't go? That's really kind of
But God also tells him, he gives him one command and he says, but you can only say what I tell you to say.
Right.
So Balaam is on his donkey and he's going down the road. And all of a sudden, there's something in front that causes the donkey to veer off.
But Balaam can't see what's in front.
He can't see in front. So he beats the donkey, he puts the donkey back on the path, and then it gets down a little narrow. It says it's between vineyards and stuff, a wall, and it gets tight. And have you ever ridden a horse?
I have.
What do they like to do?
Get close to things so that it like rubs your leg on the side of things.
And that's exactly what the donkey does. He gets right up there and he rubs and he scrapes his foot, which hurts and makes Balaam extremely mad. Beats the donkey again, puts him back on the path. Well, the third time he comes to a part where it gets so narrow that they can't even pass through to keep
Except
going.
for like one spot.
Yep. And so the donkey just lies down. Have you ever had a horse or a donkey lie down on you?
I have not.
It's scary. Now there, I suppose, it wouldn't be so much because you have either side. I mean, when that happened to me, it was the horse was getting ready to roll. So
that was so scary.
Scary. You're in the saddle. You got to try to get up and get off before you get rolled on. The donkey can't roll here.
Right. No.
But he just drops.
Balaam's mad.
Oh, he's mad, and he beats the donkey again. Now, this is where it gets interesting.
Then the donkey looks at him and says, "What have I done to you that you have struck me these 3 times?"
I love this. And then Balaam responds with, "Because you made a fool of me, and I wish that I had a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now."
I feel like I would respond differently.
I think I would go, "My donkey just talked."
Maybe it was more common back then.
I don't think so. I don't know. That seems a lot. So they just get into conversation.
Happens all the time.
But then the donkey said what?
Am I not your donkey, which you have ridden all your life up to this day? Have I been in the habit of treating you this way?
And then Balaam goes, "No." Now, I just love this. There's this entire conversation going back and forth between the donkey, and it's like, no big deal. But then here's the part. The Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord with the sword drawn in his hand. Now, here's the catch. What did Balaam say before? He said, "If I had what?"
A sword.
I'd do what?
Kill you right now.
And here's a sword right in front of him, ready to kill him if it had not been for the donkey. That's right.
So then Balaam falls on his face, and the angel asks him, "Why have you struck your donkey 3 times? I have come out as an adversary because your way is perverse before me. The donkey saw me and turned away from me these 3 times. If it had not turned away, surely just now I would have killed you and let it live."
Wow.
That's some heavy words right there. That's a lot for a talking donkey story.
That is a lot. So Balaam says, "I have sinned." So he's fallen on his face, right? He says, "I have sinned." So he realizes it. Even though he's pagan, he knows what sin is. Mm-hmm. He says, "For I did not know that you were standing on the road to oppose me."
Right.
So in other words, was he just sorry that he did, or was he sorry that he got caught?
I'm leaning more towards the latter.
Yeah, because he was on the road, right? It was only because you were on the road to oppose me and you saved my life that I've sinned now. So he says, "But if it's displeasing to you, I will return home." I'm sure he's probably pretty shaken. If you just had an angel encounter with the sword.
Right after you talked to your donkey?
I don't know that I would say if it's displeasing. I think I would have just gone on my donkey and gone home. I don't think I would have been. But he's
like wanting to have that option. If you really don't want me to, I can turn around and go back.
Yeah. So what does the angel say?
So the angel says, "You may go with the men, but speak only of what I tell you to speak."
Okay. So see, we all have free will. He didn't need to go, but he did. And he didn't need to continue. Like I said, he could have gotten on his donkey and left right away, but he didn't. Right. So God still knew that that's what was in Balaam's heart and where he was going to be going. So he says, all right, he's going to use this to drive home a major point.
And that's amazing. God can use anyone.
I know. I think it's really interesting that the donkey in the story was more spiritually perceptive than the prophet. Than the seer. The one who could see all is actually blinded to the angel. Now, the donkey had absolutely no spiritual gifts, well, that we are aware of.
Right, except for the ability to occasionally to have a conversation.
But he could see the angel and he could speak. Now, up to this point, Balaam has been portrayed as a man of great spiritual stature who can meet with God. And when he wants, and those words have tremendous effects on the fate of all nations. That's why people come to him. He's paid for hire. Mm-hmm. Yet, he's a fool, and he's blind.
Yeah. So as one of the commentators pointed out, the donkey is a perfect picture of a simple, unspectacular, yet obedient servant of God. The donkey was sensitive to God's direction, a thorn to the disobedient, and a victim of wrath of the ungodly.
You know, Balak takes him to, this is Balaam, so, okay, go back. Balak takes Balaam, once he gets there, he takes him to a specific spot. It's Bamoth Baal. Who did we just get through studying?
Baal.
Baal, that's right.
Yep.
Baal, the horn god. Right. So he takes him to his mountain, which means it's there that they sacrifice to this deity. And it's on that mountain of Baal that he wants Balaam to curse Israel. So he wants him cursed by his gods, but he wants this to hire a prophet to do it in the name of Baal, basically. And that is interesting, because what did God tell Balaam on the way there?
That the only thing he could say were the words that God told him he could.
That's right. And so instead of cursing the Israelites up on top of the mountain of Baal, he blesses Israel. Now I want you to just think about this for a moment. He's literally trumping the little god Baal by God overstepping. And so instead of cursing the Israelites, which they couldn't do, God is showing that
They're already
your God has no power,
Right.
really. And this is what you have to do. So anyway, so this is the next fun part. Because Balak, I mean, you talk about a man who is grasping to shoestrings,
Yes.
right? So he says to Balaam, he's all upset at him because you did the opposite of what I wanted. So instead of just dropping, he says, well, come here. We're going to go on to that mountain.
Because clearly it'll be a
Bless him
different
on
result.
that mountain, yes.
Kristen.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hold on.
Perfect.
Oh my gosh. Please don't make me say the line again. About what God told me to say.
No, that's it. No,
Like 2 lines.
we're not.
I have a modicum of dignity and self-respect. I was trying to rein
You were
it
just
in.
trying to make me laugh too, so that
No, I
wasn't just
wasn't. I was trying to rein it in. Ow.
you. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So Balak says to Balaam, okay. If you're not going to do it here, I'm going to take you to another mountain. And let's try that.
Right.
So he goes to the second one, and again, all he can do is bless Israel. But he's still not happy. So then he goes, okay, wait a minute. I'm going to take you to a third mountain. Now, I have to wonder, it's ironic that there's 3 mountains.
Mm-hmm.
So if we know that Baal was on the sacrificial one of that mountain, it does not say that the other 2 are, but you just kind of gotta wonder. It wasn't that far away that there was a town by the name of Ashtoreth.
That's
Yeah.
right. Up in the north.
So you just wonder who was sacrificed on those other ones, because that's exactly what they do. He offers sacrifice. I mean, it wasn't just going up there and speaking.
No,
I mean,
they
it was
built
pomp and circumstance.
7 altars and
Yes, and they
sacrificed 2 different animals on each altar. I mean, it was quite a deal. This wasn't like
sacrificed a cow and they sacrificed a lamb. Or a ram. A ram on each altar.
A bull and a ram, I think.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of animals, a lot of sacrifice.
And they did it not once, but twice, and then on the third one. And each time,
Balaam is good, and he only says what God allows him to say.
that's right. That comes to a very interesting point, because then we get into the 4th oracle of Balaam.
Because he had they called the first 3 at each one of the mountains an oracle, and then he keeps talking on this 4th one. I think maybe God is just like, you know what? We're going to use this time to lay it down.
Well, God knew it. And there again, that's why I said I think there's more to those other mountains than just the one of Baal, because he's speaking to that whole area. Now, we're getting pretty close to that Valley of the Travelers, I would say.
Yep.
You're getting very much into that area. And so who is he really speaking to? Because I don't think the king of Moab
Probably
cares and not have a clue, because
But
now
it's-
he's going to project into the future.
And it's all about territory, though, and staking claim.
That's right. And God's coming in and staking claim, and the Israelites are coming in and taking over. But now he starts doing the prophet job. He's okay. Now I'm going to redo that because that's not going to right. I'm going to hear about that. Now he's finally doing the prophecy, not just the word of God, but he's now projecting what's going to happen in the future.
Sure.
He says, I see him now. He says, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the forehead of Moab, and the skull of the Shethites. Edom will become a possession, Seir a possession of its enemies, while Israel does valiantly. One out of Jacob shall rule and destroy the survivors of Ur. Now, Ur could be a place, but Ur in Hebrew means cities. And there is, I will say this, Derek Gilbert has a spot in there too. There's another scripture where the word Ur is used, and it doesn't really make sense that it will destroy cities. But that's also the same word for Rephaim. And Rephaim is the same as the Nephilim. We're talking about Christ here. This is a messianic. So I want you to think about the implication. You have a pagan seer who is being the mouthpiece of God
Yahweh.
to this area,
Right.
and he is prophesying about the Messiah, the one that's going to come from Jacob, the one who he's seeing,
But not now.
who's coming in the future, and he will crush the forehead and the skull. I can't help but also think of Goliath, and we've talked about a little bit, and we're going to get into that more, the real possible crucifixion site of Christ, and where that is, and why is it called the place of Golgotha, the place of the skull? Because there was a skull buried on that hill, that mountain, the Mount of Olives, and that skull was
Goliath's.
Golgotha. Yeah. So by Christ being crucified
On Goliath's skull.
Basically, we don't know if it was exactly on, but that place, he was crushing the skull.
It's just interesting that God chooses to use Balaam, but I think it's all about location in this, and showing again that he's staking that claim,
He is, because he says, and one out of Jacob shall rule and destroy the survivors of cities?
That doesn't make sense.
Or is it the survivors
of the
Rephaim?
Would make more sense.
It would make more sense. This is just us saying. But it does. I mean, when you know that area, like we said, taking sentences out of context or taking scriptures out of context without knowing the whole thing and the region and the area, and people go, oh, the Old Testament is boring. Au contraire.
There's a talking donkey. You
Exactly.
can see angels.
Yeah, and you don't even have to watch Disney to
find it. No,
to find a story. of
DreamWorks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's where they got their inspiration.
That's quite possible.
This is kind of an exciting topic, and I can't wait to dig in a little more of what that's going to mean to us. It's a fun story, and you're like, okay, but that was Israelites. Was it really in there? They're coming in. There's wars, whatever. You got a guy who's doesn't know God, and a donkey talks.
What does that have to do with me? Why do I need to know that?
Exactly. Well, we're going to dig into that a little later. But I think now it's time for Joy Break.
So today we found a great story. This is one that Penny had heard, and we dug it up, and it fits the topic for today. And I would just like it noted that in the reading of this story, when I say the word ass, I'm talking about a donkey. I'm not cursing. So I apologize ahead of time for anyone who's offended. A preacher wanted to raise money for his church, and on being told that there was a fortune in horse racing, decided to purchase one and enter it in the races. However, at the local auction, the going price for horses was so high that he ended up buying a donkey instead. He figured that since he had it, he may as well go ahead and enter it into the races. To his surprise, the donkey came in third. The next day, the local paper carried this headline: "Preacher's ass shows." The preacher was so pleased with the donkey that he entered it in the race again, and this time it won. The paper read, "Preacher's ass out in front." Now the bishop was rightfully upset with this kind of publicity, and he ordered the preacher not to enter the donkey in another race. The paper headline the next day read, "Bishop scratches preacher's ass." Oh, this is gonna be fun. This was too much for the bishop, so he ordered the preacher to get rid of the donkey. The preacher decided to give it to a nun in a nearby convent. The paper headline the next day read, "Nun has best ass in town." The bishop fainted. He informed the nun that she would have to get rid of the donkey, so she sold it to a farmer for $10. The next day, the headline read, "Nun sells ass for $10. Now this was too much for the bishop, so he ordered the nun to buy back the donkey, lead it to the plains where it could run wild and free. Next day, the headline in the paper read, "Nun announces her ass is wild and free." The bishop was buried the next day. Now, the moral of this story is being concerned about public opinion can bring you much grief and misery and even shorten your life. So be yourself and enjoy life. Stop worrying about everyone else's ass and just cover your own. You'll be a lot happier and you'll live longer. Oh, I didn't know how I was going to get through that. I think one pause, that was pretty good. I can't even imagine what that tops all of the typos on church bulletins and all of those. Like, some of those are good, but this is better.
Yeah, but it is true about how funny that is when we are so worried about what someone might think, and then to try to help rectify it, it just continues to get worse and worse and worse and worse.
So this other joke I absolutely love. My grandma thought this joke was hilarious, and for someone who was as proper as she was, the fact that she thought this joke was hilarious just killed me every time. She just got such a chuckle out of it. So back in the old days, farmers out in the Wild West used to send away for mail order brides. One of these farmers got him a mail order bride and went to the train station to pick her up. He pulled up to the station on his horse, leading a pack mule of her stuff. He got her stuff onto the mule and put her on the back of his horse. They started out back to the farmer's place, and a few miles out of town, the horse spooked and threw the farmer and his new bride to the ground. The farmer got up and made sure she was okay, and then grabbed the horse by the reins and looked the horse in the eye. "That's one," said the farmer. They started on their way again. Again, the horse spooked and threw the couple to the ground. After making sure that the lady was okay, he grabbed the horse's reins again, looked it in the eye, and said, "That's two." The couple started on their way again. Just as they came to the gate to the farmer's house, the horse spooked again. The farmer again made sure that his wife was okay. He then got out his gun, grabbed the horse's reins, and looked the horse in the eye. "That's three." And then he shot the horse. His new bride was shocked at the horrible thing done right before her eyes, proceeded to rant and rave about how cruel the farmer was. The farmer let her go on and on about his shortcomings. Finally, she ran out of things to say. The farmer looked up and said, "Are you finished?" And she said yes, and he said, "That's one." again, like, I don't know why, but she was just so tickled by that joke. And I've heard it told with a team of horses and with a donkey, which is what made me think of this. So I had to share that with you today. So Grandma, that one's for you. Now is the time for
What do you do with that?
So this is the portion of our show where we look at why should you care that a donkey talks? Why is it important to you? And most importantly, how does it apply to your life today? What can you take from that story to help you understand God a little bit better, understand the Bible a little bit better? So what do we do with that?
That's a good question. As I said, a lot of these Old Testament stories, most people say, I don't read the Old Testament. I only read the New Testament. And when they get right down to it, they only read the 4 Gospels, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with the 4 Gospels.
Nope.
I've always said if you want to really narrow it down, if you just study Matthew 6 and 7 and you memorize those, that's pretty much mostly what you need to know. But why do we need to know the Old Testament? Because of all these wonderful stories, and they do apply to us.
They do.
On both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And it interconnects with what we were talking about last week.
It does.
So we've been looking at these other entities, and we didn't make them up. And they're not just showing their faces now, but they've been around forever. And throughout all of the scriptures, and this is yet just one more story, that Baal makes an appearance. Mm-hmm. And who's worshiping him? But the king of Moab.
Right.
And the king of the Amorites. And all the other kings around that area. They were completely delved into sacrificing to the pagan gods.
Right.
And Balaam, he's a prophet for hire. Yeah, I love that. You didn't think of that.
And you wouldn't think of God utilizing him.
And yet he did. He allowed it. You know, people say, why does God, or you've heard the word, God caused that to happen. And that's not what happens. We were watching a show the other night, and it was interesting because one of the gals that was on there was using all the cliches that you hear.
Mm-hmm. Everything happens for a reason.
God caused that to happen for this reason or for that reason. No, that's not always the truth. Because we all have what? Free will. But God works within the parameters of that free will. He does ultimately. He's God. He knows what we're going to choose. But in and through that choosing, he still works to fulfill his plan. Now, if Balaam would have said, no, I want nothing to do with your God. I've heard about your God. God would have just had the Israelites march right beside Moab, right? Mm-hmm. And he would have helped defend them or whatever because he said that we're not going to mess with Moab.
Right.
But you have a man who took the bait. Mm-hmm. He's like, oh, okay, I'll talk to God if the price is right.
Mm-hmm. And he probably made a pretty decent chunk of money.
Oh, he did. And he was fully expecting, this is what I love, he was fully expecting to talk to God. He talked to all the other deities, so why would Yahweh not be any different?
Yeah, this God of Israel can't be different than any other one. And then he finds out
that God is actually the real God. But not right at the beginning. He has this little conversation and God says what? Don't.
Yeah.
That would be pretty cut and dried. But how many times in your life have you asked God an answer to your question? And unfortunately the answer was no, don't, stop it. And what was your response to him?
Well, I really don't like that answer. Do you have an option B?
You know, Balaam, he goes back to him and he says, well, no, I was told no. But the way he says it, it's like, well, he told me no, but he just kind of leaves the door open in case maybe God will change his mind.
Right. Because he clearly doesn't know God well yet.
Exactly. Which I'm sure the other deities that he's talked to, depending on which way the wind blows for them too, maybe they do change their mind quite a bit.
Or who, if they sacrificed the right thing or offered them, well, I'm going to tell you no now because I know they got more money. And if I say no the first time, they're going to bring more.
Did you notice the other thing throughout the story? God never requires from him a sacrifice.
No, because he's pagan.
That's
he's
right.
Outside of that whole
Spectrum
of.
Right. So, but Balaam then, he says nothing else. He just kind of alludes to, opens the door. And so Balak then doesn't like no for an answer.
Right.
So he says more money and more people. It says, go again. Maybe persuade him this time. I'll give you anything you want. If you were Balaam and now you've been approached a second time with even more money and more prestigious people going, we know who you are, we know what you can do, we've seen your results. Mm-hmm. We will give you anything you want.
He's going, man, that's a nice offer. I'm gonna at least try.
Exactly. He goes, oh, I know what God said, but...
Yeah, let me just double check.
Okay, now there's an interesting thing, because in Timothy, in the New Testament, Paul is telling them a worker is worth his wages. That is interesting, because for a lot of us in ministry, we do everything kind of for nothing. There's a lot of volunteer work. Those who are paid, it's not as, for the majority, it's not as glamorous and high-paying position or whatever you do. And that's kind of where Timothy was at. Paul is telling Timothy, don't think that you have to do it for nothing, right? A worker is worth his wages. So don't feel bad about accepting money when people give it to you.
Right.
You have to survive.
Right.
God never asked us to do it alone.
Right.
But it's far from prosperity teaching.
Right.
Either. Right. Okay, so Balak, knowing this, and Balaam knowing that he's used to getting paid for what he does, he's never done it for nothing.
Right.
Sweetens the pot a little more. So he goes to God a second time and he goes, oh, should I go or not? Now, do you think God knew that? Balaam might have been trying to pull the wool over God's eyes, like he didn't know what was going on.
I don't know. I think he just thought, because if he thought that God was like all the other gods, it was worth a shot.
Here's the difference. God saw right into his heart. Mm-hmm. He knew who he was. He knew who he was dealing with before in the beginning. Mm-hmm. So this time he tells him to go. Now this is where it gets so interesting, because we're like, it's so conflicting. He tells me no the first time, and then he tells me yes, I can go. So that means I get to keep the money, right?
But then he says,
they're strings.
Yeah, you can't curse them. They've already been blessed. And you can only say what I allow you to say.
So you see the Balaam's playing both sides here, because technically he should only get to keep the money if he does what the king of Moab wants.
Right.
But he's going.
Which would allude to the fact that perhaps he thinks he can do what the king of Moab wants. But he already knows he's not supposed to.
That story could have just been right there.
Right.
It could have just stopped. But God throws in the most interesting thing. He saddles his donkey and he goes for a ride. But it's not like any ride that he's ever had.
That's true.
Well, this is the exciting part, because it's not what you expect to see in the scriptures. A talking donkey? And the funny part is, he's known this donkey his entire life, and never once has he talked to him that I am aware of.
It seems like this is the first
Unless the donkey's possessed, and it seems like a pretty nice donkey, so I don't think that was the case. Yes. So anyway, the donkey just starts talking to him. Why are you beating me? And he just gets into a conversation like nothing had ever even happened. Like this was just a normal, everyday occurrence.
Kind of makes you wonder.
If your dog or your cat or your horse or your fish just started talking to you, did you just start talking back without thinking anything about it?
Probably not. Definitely not.
You'd be like, wait a minute, well, what did you just say? But no, he just gets into this conversation like no big deal.
Right.
And he says, well, if I had a sword, I'd kill you with it. And there's literally one just standing right in front of me.
The irony.
The irony of all of it. And I think that's why God does it.
I think so
it's
too.
the complete irony, because he couldn't see it, and he should have been able to see it.
Right. And I wonder if that was maybe that had to have been a turning point.
Well, that was the lesson.
The turning point.
That was the lesson. You think you're big britches, and you're not.
Because your donkey could see that something was about to kill you, and you couldn't see.
You couldn't see anything.
Right. It's just fascinating. God just works in cool ways.
He does. He works in really cool ways. I feel sorry for the donkey, because the donkey did get beat 3 times. And he does say, you've known me your whole life. Have I ever done that? Which I'm really impressed with that donkey, because most donkeys are really stubborn. So for that to not be the normal, I'm impressed.
That is impressive.
And that's probably why God created that donkey, just for that purpose. So that way he would be obedient for every time but
that one.
That one time. So it'd be out of the ordinary.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what God does. He takes those extraordinary moments and throws it in our ordinary to get our attention.
Oh, absolutely. You know, that would be a good definition of a brick wall moment. Except, you know, in this case, it was a angel with a sword moment.
Yeah, and the donkey just dropped to the ground. He couldn't go anywhere.
Right. Because God does. I mean, he gets our attention in whatever way he needs to. And when subtlety doesn't work, he drops in something bigger, like a talking donkey.
I've talked to a lot of people who were not believers before, and there's always been that extraordinary, the out of the ordinary, the brick wall moment that happens, the angel with the sword, to jar them from where they're at.
Right.
But you know, we see that Balaam, then he falls on the ground, and he does what most of us would do. Oh, I'm so sorry, I have sinned.
I did not see you standing there.
Yeah, I wouldn't have continued to go if I had known you were there. That doesn't mean he was still continuing to go. It was just more or less now that I can see you really didn't want me to go, because when you told me the first time not to go.
I apparently didn't take you seriously.
Right. And for just kicks and grins, I love that God waits until he goes to the mountain of Balaam.
Mm-hmm.
One of them. He had a lot of mountains.
He did.
But he goes to that mountain, and all this sacrifice is done to that. It reminds me of Mount Carmel with Elijah.
Yes.
They go and they sacrifice, and they're calling on their God, who? Baal.
Mm-hmm.
Rain down, fire. Yeah, if your God's the God of thunder, if it's Zeus, the storm god, he should be able to throw down a lightning bolt and hit that on fire.
Right.
If this is really Baal, he should be able to curse Israelites.
Mm-hmm.
And yet,
that didn't happen.
Nothing. Which we know that the entities are given some power, but they couldn't light the wood on fire, dry wood on fire.
Right.
And yet God did soaked wood with a moat. And here, God stopped them from being able to curse his people.
Right.
And so Balaam, at least, he's obedient in the fact that he opens his mouth and he can only say what God says.
Right.
Which is blessings, not curses.
Correct.
What I love about the story with the king of Moab, Balak, he's not happy with that result. And so if I move you to a different location, and again, into a different location, he sees what? 3 times again. 3 times the donkey's diverted, 3 different mountains. Each time, same result.
Same result. What's the definition of insanity again? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result.
Yeah. I like this story because there is so much to unpack in there. And then at the end, just for the icing on the cake, the cherry on top, what's the 4th oracle that he actually gives?
Messianic prophecy.
Yeah. Who knew? And it comes out of what? It comes out of a pagan's mouth.
Right.
And he says, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel.
That's right.
It talks about crushing. Oh, what was that? That was in Genesis, was it not?
That the
seed
of Eve will crush the seed of the serpent.
And gosh.
And they will strike at her heel.
Yeah. This gets into the skull of Edom, the Edomites, Esau. That's who Goliath comes from. I love how the Israelites are moving up, and it is talking about the area where they're at. It's in that Valley of the Travelers. Moses
Getting
has
towards that.
not died
Nope.
yet. He's getting close. But he has not. Aaron died.
Yes.
And they buried him. And we were there. We were like, we went right by that mountain, and they go, see that mountain right there? Yeah, that's where Aaron was buried.
And we were like,
take a quick picture, because it was all windy and twisty and up and down. And then we get to Mount Nebo, where Moses was gathered.
Yes. Yeah, gathered. Good word.
Gathered. Well, we don't know where he was buried.
Right.
We don't know that he was really... We only know that because there's another little fun spot. We talked about that last time, I think, with the whole fighting over Moses' body.
Yes. Yep, we did.
Why would Satan fight over his body? Well, it was in this area of the travelers, the territory. And the travelers are the shades, which are the Rephaim, which are the disembodied spirits of the giants from the flood. When you know that, all of these stories start making sense, and you start seeing the connections that you never saw before. And that's why at the end, when it talks about Israel will be valiant, but one out of Jacob shall rule and destroy the survivors of the cities. That doesn't make any sense. Why would Christ destroy the survivors of the cities? But however, in Aramaic, it means watchers. That's the captives when Jesus died, and he literally went to beyond Hades, but to Tartarus, who he preached to. It was that fallen realm that was down there.
Yeah.
It kind of gives you goosebumps.
It really kind of does,
doesn't it?
It really kind of does. Brings it all together, and that's the cool part about so many of these stories. They all tell the same message of hope.
And it makes us pause and think, if I were Balaam, what would I have done? Especially if I didn't know God.
Right. And if I know God, but the price was right,
No.
what would I do now?
Yeah, that is a good question to ask ourselves. And ultimately, God does not cause all things to happen. No. And it wasn't all in his plan. He has a plan, but we have free will. We're not puppets on a string.
No.
We're not monkeys playing the cymbals in the band. No, we have our own choices to make, but he still works in and through those choices.
All those choices, right.
Now, how does that happen for our life? Well, it just means that depending on those choices we make, our lives can be a lot easier or they can be a lot more difficult. And I look at Balaam right here. I mean, he had choices to make. God finally allowed him to see the angel. But he could have been run through because he made the wrong choice in the beginning.
Right. He didn't choose wisely.
But he continues to make better choices as he allows God to speak through him. And what coolness that we have on top of one of these mountains in that area. And again, we're talking about the fallen realm. What is he prophesying but the Messianic prophecy?
Right. He's talking about the coming of Christ.
And that's exactly what happens at the base of Mount Hermon, what happens at the top of Mount Hermon, the mountain of the fallen realm.
That's right.
Christ is constantly prophesied through the mouth of Peter at the base. You are the Messiah, the Son of God.
That's right.
And then on top, this is my son. Well, please listen to him.
Yeah.
And then again at that Jordan River, which is right on the edge.
So many times.
Where Jesus was baptized. This is my son.
Right. And even Andrew, right? Behold the Lamb of God.
Yeah.
Who has come to take away the sin of man.
Well, that was John the Baptist who prophesied that, but Andrew
was
heard
like
it and saw it to him and said,
that's right there. Right.
That's what he tells Peter. Yep. It's all in this area. So he's not just prophesying to the people.
He's talking to everyone who's listening.
That's right. All who have ears, let them hear.
That's right.
So we hope maybe that you will take some of these scriptures a little more serious, that you'll dig in, and it's fascinating what you learn. In fact, so much of the important stuff, and there's another story that's right before this, it's in chapter 20, talks about the fiery Nakash, the seraphim.
The seraphim.
The seraph. What does that really mean, and is it what we've always thought?
Probably not.
Probably not. Because if it's odd and it's weird and it's in the Bible, it's there for a reason. So go back, read chapter 20, read chapter 21. And if you need to, pull out a map, because there's some really good ones in your study Bibles, or you can pull them up online. In fact, you could even do a map of where the Israelites wandered in the wilderness, and it'll give you a lot of this geographical area.
It helped me when I was reading it this time to have the map. And obviously I have the blessing that I've been there, and so I could bring where I've been today and what we saw today versus what the Bible is showing and what the map, what the Bible is talking about, what the map showed. But it really brought it to light a lot more when I could see, oh, this is kind of where they were, and this is the path that we think they took, and these are some of the cities that are still existing that they talked about. So yeah, it helps bring it all together.
So maybe you're like Balaam, and you're going, hang on, let me rethink this.
That's right.
Because you've been presented with an opportunity that is really enticing, but maybe that's not what God is calling you to do.
Right.
Don't overthink it. Trust me. When God says do this or don't do that, there's a better plan.
That's right. A plan that we can't even see.
And as we are so reminded, if even Balaam, who did not know God, and obviously did not know Christ,
right,
was able to prophesy about the one who is coming, I challenge you this week that when you're reading these scriptures, when you're reading these chapters, if you have not, or maybe you're hearing this for the first time, and you don't know Jesus, Balaam didn't either, and yet God showed him a glimpse of the glory. Some will even say that the angel of the Lord that held the sword was Jesus Christ himself. And what was he holding in his hand? Was a sword. And if you know Ephesians, what is the sword in the armor? It's the word of God.
That's right.
He was opening Balaam's eyes to the word. And what does the word say? In the beginning was the word. The word was with God, and the word was God, which is Jesus Christ. And John 3:16.
For God so loved
the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him, whoever, it doesn't matter what nation, tribe, tongue,
no matter what you've been through, where you come from, what you've believed,
your past is,
right,
whoever believes in him shall not perish. And Balaam didn't perish. We don't know if he accepted Christ or not, but I know that had to really be a jar.
But we have the opportunity now
to have eternal life. So until next time, with that hope and that joy, and hopefully some happy reading for this week.
That's right.
Bye.